Chodesh Tov, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant of Sinai with Rabbi David Silber. It's a pleasure to have everyone learning here today. Thank you for joining as we continue this series going through the book of Exodus. We are learning today with Rabbi David Silber, who is the Dean and founder of Drisha. Sources for today's class come from the book of Exodus. If you have a preferred Tanakh, you're welcome to keep it open as a reference, but we will also be sharing sources on screen from Sefaria. We do want to hear your questions and comments, you're very welcome to ask them in chat or in person. All I ask is two things. First, please, if you want to ask your questions directly, please hold them for when Rabbi Silber takes questions and comments. And also, if you are not actively speaking, to please mute yourself so that we do not pick up on any unwanted background noise. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Rabbi Silber.
Thank you very much. Okay, we started last week the story of the Egel, the golden calf. We have this week and next week. We'll focus our attention on the story, and we'll pick it up in chapter 32 in the 9th pasuk, where Moshe is informed, while he's still on the mountain, that the people have made for themselves a golden calf. Last week we focused to some extent last week towards the last part of the session on the role of Aaron, and maybe we'll touch upon that again later. But right now we're going to focus on Moshe's responses to the situation where he finds out when he's still on the mountain that the people have made a golden calf. So we have this in the 9th pasuk. Actually, I take that back. It even starts earlier in the 7th pasuk, just 2 psukim earlier. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lech reid ki shichet amcha shehalekta me'eretz Mitzrayim saru maher min haderech asher tzivitim asu hem egel masecha vayishtachavu lo vayizbechu lo vayomru ele Elohecha Yisrael asher alucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. So Moshe now is informed. He has no idea. He's been on the mountain for a while. We don't actually know how long he's been there, but the first pasuk of chapter 32 said the people saw he was delaying. Ki Moshe Moshe Lared Minahar. Then we discussed the Egel was constructed, and God now speaks to Moshe, Lech Reid, go down. Your people have corrupted themselves, and it's very striking. Asher Herita Me'eretz Mitzrayim, the people that you brought up from Egypt. It sort of mirrors what the people had said. People had said, Moshe is missing. The one who took us out of Egypt is missing. We have to construct for ourselves the golden calf. Kizem Moshe ish asher helanu b'eretz Mitzrayim lo yodanu mehoyelo. Moshe, the man who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. And did Moshe really bring him up out of Egypt? He was God's messenger. God brought them up out of Egypt. Moshe was God's messenger. And the suggestion that we made last week, and many of the Mefarshim say this as well, that the people initially don't want to replace God. They want to replace Moshe. They want something else to be God's messenger, as it were, but that sort of gets out of hand. In any event, now God speaks. God says to Moshe, the people you took out of Egypt, they're the ones who have corrupted themselves. The Torah presents God in extremely human terms in this interchange, as if God is saying, listen, he's sort of blaming Moshe. The ones you took out of Egypt, they've corrupted themselves. That's what Hashem says to Moshe. Now we have Moshe's response. But before we get to Moshe's response, in verse number 9, God continues to speak. Vayomer Hashem. Now God has been speaking the whole time. Moshe has said nothing. So Vayomer Hashem is like part 2. And what we always have to wonder when the same person or God is speaking, and the text introduces again with Vayomer, even though God is the speaker, you have to wonder about that. Is it to make the point, and now I have a separate thing to say? That's one possibility. Is it that the reader expects some kind of response? Well, in this case, the speaker, God might expect or hope for a response. Moshe says nothing. And what God is saying now, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, I've seen these people, they're very stubborn. They can't change. v'yichara pi bohem v'achalem v'eseh otcha l'goy gadol. God said to Moshe, Hanichali, leave me alone. Hanichali, let me do what I want to do, and I will let my anger will rage against them, and will destroy them. Achalem will destroy them, and I'll make you a nation, as if to say, gives Moshe the option of the people that you've brought up, they're hopeless. They're Amkshe Oref. So on the other hand, I still want to go through with the project of bringing the people into the land. So I'll start with you. It reminds us very much, we had this earlier in the Torah, right in the beginning of the Chumash, story of Noah. That's what God said to Noah. God said to Noah, you're the only righteous person. Otchara iti tzaddik lefanai badora. I said, no one else is righteous. I'll build a new world through you. Make yourself an ark, get your family together, get some animals, we'll have a recreation of the world. And it very much sounds like the same thing over here. In that case, Noah did exactly what God commanded Noah to do. He did exactly what God commanded him. The Torah says it explicitly and twice in the Noah story. And here we have Moshe's response. But I want to point out that before we get to Moshe's response, we have this statement by God, V'yato hanicholi, leave me be, hanicholi, and I will destroy them. The question is how to read hanicholi. And I think one way to read it, which I prefer personally, is that God actually is inviting Moshe to speak. That is to say, if you leave me alone, if you're silent, because remember that Moshe was initially God speaks, Moshe says nothing. Then God continues, listen, if you leave me alone, I'm going to destroy them. And that essentially is an invitation for Moshe to speak. We don't have that in the case of Noah. We studied Noah, I pointed out. There's no suggestion in the initial story of Noah that Noah does anything wrong by building his ark and bringing the family and the animals, etc. He doesn't pray for the world. But there he's not invited to pray for the world. And in fact, God said explicitly, you're the only righteous person. There is nobody else. In the case of Abraham and Sodom, there God invites Abraham to speak. Let's start with that. And, God said, I have to go down and check it out, And that's an invitation for Abraham to negotiate, as it were, to pray, negotiate with God. Here, I think as well, we have an invitation. Hanicholi. If you leave me alone, if you leave things as they are, I'll make you the nation. And now we have Moshe's response. It's one of the great turning points of the Chumash, the story. It says, Vayichal Moshe et pnei Hashem Elohav. So Moshe Vayichal. That's a very interesting word. Entreated, ochilo la'el, to entreat God. That's one possibility of the word Vayichal. But when you read the word Vayichal, it's hard not to remember that in the beginning of the Chumash, the word Vayichal, Yochel, Yichal, appears several times in the initial stories of the Torah, specifically with Noah. Vayochel Noach ish adamah. Vayochel Noach shalach et ha'orev, or whatever, or the Yonah. Vayochel.
Vayachel
Vayochel Noach ish adamah, vayita korem. You have it several times with Noach, the verb Vayichal. And you also have it with Migdal Bavel. There, v'zeh hachilam la'asot. And you also have it in the Chumash, was after the birth of Shet and his son Enosh, Oz Huchal Likro B'Shem Hashem. And it's actually very interesting, particularly Oz Huchal, the birth of Enosh, people began to call out in God's name. And what's interesting about that is that many of the commentaries and the Midrashim think that's a negative. And Oz Huchal sounds like a good thing to call out in God's name. But the Midrashim talk about Huchal, and they interpret in terms of the word chulin. The world people began to call other things in God's name. It's not talking about God. That's a whole other conversation, a whole other discussion. But my point is, leaving that alone, which is an interesting question of why they interpret it that way, etc. But my point is that by Vayichal Moshe over here, I think the Chumash does want to remind us of Noah. The offer God made, or God makes over here, was the offer God made to Noah. God commanded Noah to build the ark, right? And Noah does what God commanded. And over here we have a similar situation. I'll destroy them, I'll make a nation out of you. But over here, in response to Hanicholi, we have the Vayichal Moshe. And of course, we all remember that in the very beginning of this book that we started quite a while ago, that when Moshe is born, and there's a decree that all the boys will be cast into the river and killed, Paro's decree, what does his mother do? She makes for him a Tevat Goma. She makes an ark. Moshe is saved from the hands of Paro in Mitzrayim because Moshe is placed inside a Teva. That's the word of the Torah, and you can, of course, we connect this immediately to the Teva of Noah. So the Chumash in the very beginning of Sefer Shemot has set up this link between Moshe and Noah. When you read chapter 2, actually, beginning of chapter 2, when you read that, you don't really know why the Chumash would do that. I mean, there are other reasons as well, but we have it in our head. And now you come to chapter 32, and suddenly the story of Noah, in a sense, reappears, but in a different way, because this time Moshe does not simply do what God. Moshe could have said, okay, that makes sense. The people are hopeless. We know that he had his own questions about the people. But over here, Moshe takes a different tack. So, Vayichal Moshe Vayomer, Lama Hashem Yechareh Apcha B'Yamecha, Asher Otzeita Me'eretz Mitzrayim, B'Koach Gadol U'V'Yod Chazakah. The commentaries, I think the Medrash, is bothered by a simple question, which is, Moshe says to God, what are you so upset about? Lama Hashem Yech, what are you upset about? What am I upset about? They made a golden calf. They violated the first of the 10 commandments. They violated the first thing I said after the 10 commandments. What do you mean, what am I upset about? It means Lama Hashem. You would expect Moshe to pleading with God, right? Yes, the people that, and later on he does say this. The people have sinned grievously. Yes, God, your mercies are. But over here, Lama Hashem Yechareh Apcha B'Yamecha, which is why I think some of the Midrashim have Moshe actually attacking God in a sense and saying, listen, what do you expect from them? Are you kidding me? You took him out 3 months, and not only did you take him out 3 months ago with your mighty hand, don't tell me I took him out. I have no power to take anybody out. You did it. And the Medrash adds, and you gave them all the silver and gold. What do you expect from these people? So that's the Midrashim, but they're picking up on the Lama. What are you angry about? Lama Hashem Yechareh Apcha B'Yamecha. Moshe says, not my people. You said Shechet Amcha. Your people have corrupted themselves. Not my people. They're your people. Remember? You came to me and you pleaded with me to go to Mitzrayim. I tried to resist. But what could I do? You forced me to go. They're your people. And not only that, I couldn't possibly take them out of Egypt. It's all the miracles, the plagues. That wasn't me. So therefore, don't put this on me. That's basically how the Medrash reads it over here. It's very powerful. As I said, it's put in very human terms. Lama Hashem, what's the problem here? That is to say, it's your problem. It's not my problem. You took him out. You put him in this situation. And the Medrash adds, and what do you expect? Your expectations are completely out of line, right? That's what the Medrash, how the Medrash reads it. And I think there's something to that, to the Lama Hashem, Yechareh Apcha B'Yamecha. And now that's the first Lama. First Lama is in verse number 11, and in verse number 12 we have another Lama. Lama Yomru Mitzrayim Reimar B'Ra'ah Hotziam La'arog Otam Beharim U'Charotam Me'al Pnei Adama Shuv Mecharon Apecha V'Hinachem Al Hara Li'amecha. This is this argument, and I just want to spend a couple of moments on this pasuk. I think is very central. The second argument is, as I said, very human terms. The second argument is, it's not in your own interest. It's not in your best interest to do this. And what Moshe is picking up on is something we have encountered many times in our study of the first part of this book, which is that for whatever reason, God is very concerned that people know that God is God. Not just in terms of Mitzrayim. The phrase "Luman Teda," when Moshe speaks to Paro, you will know, because Paro had said, "Who's this God? Never heard of him." Moshe says, before the first plague, you will know that you will know that I exist, And before the fourth plague, you will know I exist b'kerev haaretz. I'm not just a God up there somewhere in the stratosphere. I exist in this world. And before the last seventh plague, L'man te'da ki ein kamoni. There's no God like me. I'm more powerful than your gods. L'man te'da. So that's in terms of God is very interested that Mitzrayim understand who is the true God. But on top of that, God is also interested that the people, the Jewish people, know about it. For example, in the beginning of Parashat Bo, L'man tisam bo el paro, and I've hardened his heart, so I can perform more miracles, right? L'man tisaper b'yoznei bincha uben bincha et asher hitalati b'Mitzrayim, and you will teach your children and your grandchildren how I mocked the Egyptians, my miracles in Egypt, approaching the Seder. The Seder is all about telling the story, telling others, telling the children. That's the Seder. So God is very interested, for whatever reason, that people know about God. The world know about God, Mitzrayim know, and the Jewish people. L'man te'da, you have to know. So Moshe turns to God and says, listen, you seem very concerned that people know all about you, but let me tell you something. If you kill them now, they'll think of you very differently. They will say that from the very beginning, you had no intention actually to deliver them. You had bad intentions from the beginning. They might not question your ability, your power, but they will question your intentions. You look very bad for you, and therefore that's not something you want to do. Therefore, shuv mecharon apecha pinochem araroli amecha. Right? Hinochem, change your mind, renounce the plan again for your people, for Amecha. That's one reading of it. That's clear, I think. But there actually is something else over here that I wanted to mention. I hinted at it last week. I think it's a very important point, and I think it's something that we have to think about more broadly, and that is the expression we have in verse number 12. Why should the Egyptians say bira'ah hotziyam la'arog lotam beharim? That God took them out bira'ah. So bira'ah, we translate there as evil intentions. His evil intent. That is what it means. But there's something else. Because remember, we have, and I mentioned this a couple of times in the past, including last week, that God said to Moshe, I will perform my miracles in Egypt. And I will also cast judgment upon the gods of Egypt. There are two main gods. Egypt has 1 million gods, but the two main gods are, number one, the sun god, and number two, the god of the Nile. Those are probably the two main gods of Egypt. There are many others. The god of the sun god, the main god is called Ra. That's the name of the main god of Egypt, is Ra. And the Chumash plays with that. And I noticed something just this past week, which I had forgotten, and that is the following. When the people Moshe goes to Paro before the 8th plague, and Moshe says to Paro, again, if you don't let the people go, there'll be another plague, the plague of locusts, the plague of Arba, which is a devastating plague. And Moshe walks out, and the people of Paro, the court, say to Paro, you can't continue this way. Why do you allow this to happen? Let them go already, right? Don't you know that we're doomed? So Moshe is called back. And Paro says to Moshe, back in chapter 10, okay, whom do you want to take with you? And Moshe says, everybody, old and young, men and women, etc. Everybody's got to go. Paro says, no. Paro says to him, that's not going to happen. The words of Paro, Ra'u ki ra'a neged pneichem. There is ra'a neged pneichem. What does it mean, Ra'u ki ra'a neged pneichem? So Rashi has two interpretations. I just noticed this past week. And that is, one interpretation is, ra'a neged pneichem, you have evil intentions. And that means you plan to run away. Rashi actually says that. He bases it on the Targum, which has that interpretation. If you want everybody to go, no, you can have the old ones go, but the young ones have to be behind. Otherwise, you might just run away. That's Kira Neg. That's one interpretation. Then Rashi quotes a Medrash. I believe it's found in Shir Hashirim, the Medrash, which is there's a star named Ra'ah, and the star represents blood. And Ra'ah Neged Pneichem means somehow that I'm not going to let you go. I see, I foretell, I'm told that in your future there's going to be a lot of blood. Then Rashi comments, no, it's he misunderstood. The blood was not the blood of devastation, it's the blood of circumcision. But what's interesting is, this happens many times. Rashi quotes a Medrash that Ra'ah is a star. Now, what's interesting is, I don't know if the Medrash or Rashi knew about the sun god of Egypt. I'm sure Rashi did not know. I wonder whether the Medrash knew about the sun god of Egypt. Who knows? But it's very striking that the Medrash is working along the same lines. In any event, we know about the sun god of Egypt, the Ra. And over here, I believe one way to read the verse is not that the Egyptians will say that you had bad intentions, but rather, your behavior of letting them go, only to have them die, is actually the work of our God. You think you're the boss. You think you're the chief God. No. Our God is better. Our God has the whole thing worked out. Our God permits you to do your miracles because at the end of the day, they're all going to die. They'll die in the mountains. They'll be annihilated on the face of the earth. So that's one way to read the verse. I think it's very interesting. And I want to add that, and we saw this last week, when Moshe said to Aaron, what did you do? And Aaron said to Moshe, Atoyadata et ki barahu. That's later on in this chapter. You know the people, they're bara. So I suggested an interpretation that, what do you expect from these people? They lived in Egypt, and they accepted the Egyptian way of life, including the Egyptian gods. And that raises the whole question. I raised it last week. Did the Jews worship idols in the land of Egypt? The Chumash in Sefer Shemot never says explicitly that they did. There are two other places in the Bible which is explicit that they did, one in Yechezkel and one in Yoshua. And there's some circumstantial evidence that this is true. After all, the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. So it sounds like God is concerned about that. And the story of the golden calf certainly suggests that the golden calf is a reversion to Mitzrayim, which takes the form of a kind of idolatry. And therefore, I think one can make at least good circumstantial evidence that the Chumash hints at the fact, which elsewhere said explicitly, that in Mitzrayim, the Jews did assimilate into Mitzrayim to a large extent and did worship the gods of Egypt. This whole subject, by the way, many years ago, I together with Rachel first, wrote a Haggadah called Seir Lamad, and it sold out, and now we're going to do a revised edition. Not a major revision, but this is what I want to add into this Haggadah, for next Pesach. This whole question of what we say in Mitchio Ovdei Avodah Zarah Hayu Avotenu, that whole piece of the Haggadah, I think has been, at least for me, an unexplored area, and that could be extremely interesting, and many other things connected to it. But I do want to point out about Barah. By the way, when did I hear about this robbing the god of Mitzrayim? I'll tell you when I heard about it. It was many, many years ago when I was a kid. My mother mentioned this to me, actually. She's a history teacher. She said, Ra is the Egyptian god, the sun god. Well, I remembered that, She didn't go through the psukim, but I think that it's borne out by several of the psukim. Ra neged pnechem b'ra hotziyam atoyadat et ki barahu. There may even be one more pasuk that I'm blanking on right now, but those three for sure. So two ways to read the verse. Okay, let me stop here for a moment, take comments or questions, and then we'll continue.
Silber,
Yeah.
if according to this interpretation, in the same pasuk where Hara appears twice, it would seem to reinforce the first interpretation that Ra is evil.
No, I don't think these two interpretations are contradictory. I think they're both true, actually. In other words, I think you can actually read it both ways. I think you can read it that they will. I think it's an open question. Are they going to say either way? Either way, God looks bad. In one way, God looks bad because God is sort of malicious. In the other way, God looks bad because God is not God so powerful. That they will think, whether rightly or wrongly, they will believe that their God is really calling the shots. So now the word Ra usually means bad. I don't dispute that, of course, but I do believe that both of these readings, the first reading that it means bad is clear. I think that's a simple reading of it. But I do believe that the second reading is quite viable and very interesting. And it opens up a whole other question about how one reads the story of the Exodus. That's a longer conversation. I can't get into that right now. That's the first part of Moshe's argument, that it's, either blaming God or certainly saying that it's going to look bad for you. It's going to look bad for you. And now we have this continuation of the argument in verse number 13, which is the Chali Abraham Yitzchak Yisrael Avodecha Shenishbatu Lehem Boch. V'tidaber lehem arbeh zarachem kecholchvei hashamayim. V'chol haaretz hazot asher amarti etein l'zarachem v'nachalu li'olam. Says Moshe, and there's another point. Apart from you looking bad, and apart perhaps of your expectations were, inflated expectations. But apart from that, there's another problem we got here. You made a promise. You took an oath. The oath was the oath that's referred to over here. We don't find God swearing explicitly to Yitzchak and Yaakov, but God does swear to Abraham at the Yakedah, Bi nishbati num Hashem. So Moshe says to God, you want to make a nation out of me? I mean, it'll take quite a long time to make a nation out of me. I got 2 kids, basically. And I'm hardly a nation. And you promised to build a big nation, right? Very numerous. And they're going to inherit the land. So therefore, what option do you have? These are the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Moshe reminds God that when you first spoke to me, implicit, Moshe says, when you first talked to me back in chapter 3 in the snare, I am the God of your father, the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And go back to the people. And Moshe says, what's your name? What's your name? They can ask what your name is. My name, Eya. Tell them the following. The God of Avraham, the God of your parents, your aunt, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov sent you. That's my name. My name is God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We talked about that. And these are your brothers, essentially. But the point is, that's what you said to me. These are the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And you made a promise to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? You said, your descendants will be numerous. These are the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So you really have no choice. You have to keep your commitments. This is the way the Chumash presents Moshe's speech to God, which I believe God invites. And of course, the last line is, Vayinachem Hashem al hara'ah asher diber lasot li'amo. Yes, there it so means the evil. And God relented of the evil that God had thought to do to God's people, la'amo, to God's people. This is a great turning point. Of course, it's the Torah reading on the fast days, Vayichal. And Moshe said about himself, I'm not a very good speaker. I can't talk. He does pretty well over here for someone who can't talk. He's an excellent negotiator. And the negotiation is, you got to do the right thing. But it's also self-interest. It's the right thing to do, but it's in your interest in this case to do the right thing. That's how the Chumash presents this in most human terms. And of course, Hanicholi, and the bottom line is Vayinachem Hashem al harash ediber lasot li'amo. I had mentioned in the past, and before we proceed, I just want to repeat this point, that the word Vayinachem, to relent, change one's mind, to regret, is very central in 3 different places in the Bible. It is central in the very beginning of the Chumash in chapter 6. It says, Vayinachem Hashem ki asah ha'adam ba'aretz, that God regretted that God had created the human being, and God decides to obliterate the earth and to start all over again through the person of Noach and Noach's descendants. That's one Vayinachem. This is another one over here, the golden calf. Vayinachem Hashem al hara asher diber asot liyamo. God is changed God's mind. God's not going to destroy the people. And the third Vayinachem is Nichamti ki imrachti et Shaul. God said to Shmuel, I regret that I appointed King Saul. Right? Hashem Nicham, the last words of that chapter, which is the Haftorah, Parshat Zohar, Vayinachem Hashem, that God regretted that God had made Saul the king. And I raised the question in all three cases, when you say God regrets something, does it mean actually that, in other words, how are we to read, let's say, the story of Noah? There are two different ways to read it. You can read it as, ideally we're in the Garden of Eden, but because of human sin, error, sin, whatever, or failure to acknowledge the sin, we're outside the Garden of Eden. That's one read. There's another way to read it, which is, yes, there is sin, there is failure, and all that. But the Chumash from day one never suggests that we can actually live in the Garden of Eden. The world in which we live is the world of Noah. And with all its many limitations and hardships, disappointments, etc. But that's the world in which we are. That's the world in which human beings live. In order to make that point clear, the Chumash sets up a kind of alternate world, the world in which we don't live in. Maybe some pieces of that world we can incorporate into our world, or maybe it's by contrast. The Garden of Eden is a place of innocence. They walk around naked. They're not embarrassed. They're innocent, like little children. That's not our world. Our world's not an innocent place. Can one retain a sense of innocence? Maybe. That's a big question. And the same thing with King Saul. In the book of Shmuel, does the writer of Shmuel, the book, believe that actually Saul's kingship is the ideal kingship? Ideal in the sense real. Saul's kingship may be the ideal kingship, but it's not the real kingship. Saul's kingship is king and prophet. They have a partnership. The prophet tells you what to do, the king does it. But that's not kingship. The kingship is the kingship of David. David consults with nobody before he acts. He has a prophet to correct him. And in the book of Shmuel, he's plenty of correction. But that's kingship. Kingship is David's kingship. But in order to get there, the book of Shmuel offers two alternatives. There's the leadership of Shmuel, the prophet who leads. There's the prophet plus the king. But the reality is the kingship of David is kingship, for better and worse. Maybe for worse, but that's what kingship is. Same thing over here. The Torah, the question is this Sinai event, this, in Technicolor, with all kinds of the sound effects, for the slaves that got out of Egypt 3 months ago. Maybe there were idolaters in Egypt too. Do you really expect this to work? How's that possible? It's not possible. The real tablets are the second ones. And Moshe gets silently. The real story is the 40 years in the desert. That's the real story. But the Chumash sets up this alternative. What might have been in a perfect world. Well, we don't live in a perfect world. We live in this world. So in each case, I think that Vayinachem allows us, or maybe impels us, to raise this question. I think it's a very important question. Personally, I lean towards the second way, personally, but you can read it both ways. That this is not really going to happen. Can't happen. Because that's not who the people are. It's not who we are. Our tablets are really the second tablets. Our tablets are broken. That's one way to read it, certainly. In any event, before I stop and take some comments and questions now, I want to make a different point, which is not the subject of today's session, but I want to put it out there. Maybe we'll discuss it next week, maybe on the next set of sessions, which will focus on the laws of Sefer Shemot. Maybe we'll take care of it then. But I want to point out a simple thing about the golden calf episode. The story of the golden calf appears here, and I said it's actually the central story, I would say, because it's all about defining who Israel is, who God is, what the relationship can be, etc. But the story of the golden calf is retold in the book of Dvarim. at length. And one of the interesting questions when you study the ego is to look at the two stories, and they are very different, actually. Sefer Dvarim in general, no story in Sefer Dvarim is the same as the stories earlier. They're all different. They're different stories. There appear to be many contradictions, or some contradictions in terms of fact. But even if you can resolve all the contradictions, which I don't think you can, but even if you could do this, that's the project of the great commentaries, Ramban and others, Medrash. But even if you could actually somehow resolve all the contradictions, it doesn't obviate the obvious, which is it's a different story with a different purpose, with a different motif. And I mentioned that because one of the differences, there's several differences. If we actually study that, we'll find several differences. So one of the glaring differences between the two stories is this: that in the story in Sefer Dvarim, which hopefully we'll look at someday, Moshe doesn't pray when he's on top of the mountain. Moshe goes down the mountain before he prays. He sees what's happening. He sees the people dancing around the golden calf. He breaks the tablets, and then he prays. But in our story in Sefer Shemot, it's different. In our story in Sefer Shemot, he prays when on top of the mountain. And not only that, the Chumash said in this last pasuk, number 24, says, "Vayinachem Hashem al hara'ah asher diber lasot liyamo," that God relented. God renounced the punishment that God had thought to do to God's people. And the point I would emphasize here is that the story of the golden calf in our book, the question is not whether the people survive or not. The people's survival is guaranteed before Moshe goes down the mountain. It's not a question of survival. In the book of Devarim, it's a question of survival. Moshe says nothing when on the mountain. Then he breaks the tablets. And what's going to be? And then Moshe prays. But over here, survival is not what's at stake. It's initially at stake, but Moshe resolves that right away. God agrees. The issue is the nature of the relationship. That's the question. What will this relationship be? And that should be our focus. And that's Moshe's focus. And that's the focus of the Chumash, actually. And that's what we have to pay our attention to. Okay. He's about to go down the mountain. And before he goes down the mountain, I'll stop for a moment and take comments or questions, if there are any. If not, we will continue.
I
Yes.
have one question.
Yep.
I was following you until you said the real set are the broken ones. Did you mean that?
Only broken ones. He gets a new set of tablets.
Yeah.
My point is that the question is, what's this? In the Chumash, we don't know what happened to the broken tablets. In the Chumash never says about the Midrashim talking about the broken tablets. About the broken tablets are also with us. Whether that's true in the Pshat of the Chumash is very questionable. But the point the Medrash is making is that the brokenness is part of the tablets. That the Torah is addressing the brokenness. That I think is true. In other words, the people by their nature are vulnerable for different reasons. Lack of insight, lack of commitment. They make mistakes. People make mistakes, and that the Torah is given to a people who have just worshipped the golden calf. I think that's a very important point, and that the Torah acknowledges on some level that people are fallible. The question is, what do you do with the fallibility? Do you say, nonetheless, let's set a high barrier, a high bar? Do you say, let's go slowly? That's a question of how one addresses this reality. But my point is, the idea that the Torah is given to the idol worshippers who regret what they've done, that is the actual Torah. The Torah that's given to the perfect people standing at Sinai, that's not real, because that's not who people are. And the Torah has to be real, so that the luchot, the real tablets, are the second ones, not the first ones. I just mentioned the broken tablets. I don't mean that actually the broken tablets are inside the ark, although that's a question in the Talmud. The Gemara debates that. Whatever happened to these broken tablets? But the idea of the broken tablets being in the ark, the idea that Torah addresses real people with real limitations, that I think is real. That I think is the real Torah.
No, I
other
agree with you.
businesses
I didn't understand what you meant to say.
Right.
that
So good.
real
Thanks.
one-
So I was able to clarify. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
It's a good point. It was very unclear, but that's what I have in mind. Okay, now we get to stage 2. We'll see.
Rabbi
Yes.
Silber,
Go ahead.
just before you move on, do you have time for one more question?
Yes, of course.
This is in chat from Ozzy Orbach. Quote, when Hashem says he regrets the evil he was planning to do, what does it mean for God to regret? And how can God call what he was about to do evil?
Well, from our perspective, it will be evil. Evil in the sense of, not that it's wrong, but, evil is here. Evil would mean tragic, for us, tragic consequences. It would be very tragic if we didn't have an opportunity to serve God and to live and to serve God and to live a meaningful life, or life at all. That would be evil. I agree that the word evil would mean something different. It doesn't mean it. I mean, Moshe, right? Moshe might say you can't do. You're doing the wrong thing if you do this, right? Moshe doesn't believe that God acts in a manner which is evil, but Moshe said that's what the Egyptians, that's what the world will say. The world will see it as evil, but not that God would do evil. I think that's the shot over here, either from our perspective or what people might perceive it. But clearly, from God's perspective, it's not evil because they deserve it. You violate God's word, you violate the first of the dibrot, which is about idolatry, which is also, from God's perspective, a lack of gratitude for what God has done, taking us out, etc. From God's perspective, it's not evil, it's justice. But from the way people might see it, they might see it as injustice, and it's certainly for our standpoint would be very sad state of affairs. So it's a good question. I think evil has to be read differently in verse number 14. I agree. Right. All right. Let us now proceed. Now we go. So again, survival is assured. It's not a question of survival. And now we come to the way the Chumash tells its story. Vayifen vayered Moshe minahar. Ushnei luchot ha'edut biyado. Luchot ketuvim b'shnei avrihem. Mizeh u'mizeh hem ketuvim. V'aluchot ma'aseh Elohim hema. V'amichtav michtav Elohim u'charut ha'luchot. All right, so the great story of the golden calf, it really is where it starts. Moshe vayifen, Moshe turns, he goes down the mountain. He's carrying the tablets. The Torah calls them luchot ha'edut. Okay, edut is testimony. They testify to a covenant, the luchot habrit, right? The Torah says these tablets were the tablets are the tablets of God. They're written on both sides, mizeh u'mizeh, on both sides, and they are the work of God. And the writing is the writing of God engraved upon the tablets. Now, the Chumash has already told us that these tablets are the work of God. Where does it say that? Let's see where it says that. The last verse of chapter 31. Vayitenu Moshe kachaloto v'deber ito b'har Sinai shnei luchot ha'edut. Luchot even ketuvim b'etzba Elohim. Torah is explicit. God gave to Moshe, after God had finished speaking to Moshe, giving all the instructions about the Mishkan, 2 tablets, the tablets of testimony, luchot edut, tablets written the finger of God, inscribed with the finger of God. So we know this already. And the question now is, why does the Chumash repeat this? And that would add another question. Not only does the Chumash repeat it, but it added a detail that we don't have earlier. Namely, it's inscribed on both sides, mizeh u'mizeh. Those are two separate questions. Why repeat? And then we have the additional piece of information of mizeh u'mizeh hem ketuvim. So let's leave out the mizeh for now. We'll get to it. So one answer is a very simple answer, actually. And that is that what the Chumash is setting up for us is the fact that Moshe is going to break the luchot. He's going to smash these luchot. And the chutzpah really, in a sense, the Medrash picks up. Moshe is going to smash. It's like, imagine someone taking a Torah and smashing a Sefer Torah. We'd be appalled by that. Well, this is much worse. It's not just Sefer Torah. This is not a Sefer written by some scribe. This is written by God over here. The writing is the writing of God, the tablets and the tablets of God. And Moshe is going to smash these tablets. That's unbelievable. That is one point. And the Chumash wants to emphasize it over here as he goes down the mountain. There is, however, another point. To me, a more important point, actually. A more drastic point. Because what the Chumash emphasizes over here is that these tablets, these luchot, are the writing of God. They have the tablets of God, and the writing is the writing of God inscribed upon the tablets. Now, in the previous whole bunch of chapters that we skipped, maybe we come back to it someday, we skipped it. Those are all the instructions about building the Mishkan, beginning in chapter 25 through chapter 31. And the Mishkan has many different pieces to it. But the main vessel of the Mishkan, the first vessel that's mentioned in chapter 25, is actually the ark, the Aron. And the Chumash says, and inside this ark, you will place the tablets that I will give you. The Luchot Edut are placed inside the ark, and that's the critical vessel of the Mishkan. Now the Mishkan, and we just read recently, actually yesterday, and the week before, about the actual building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is built by people. The Torah calls them Chachamim. The women are Chachamot, the men are Chachamim. Together they volunteer, make donations to the temple, and together their great artistry, they actually build the temple. The instructions were given by God. The building is the building of human abilities, human intelligence, human ability. Lachshov machshavot, chochma, bina, dat. So people build a Mishkan. But there's one piece of the Mishkan you can't build. No person can build it. And that's the ark can be built by people. What goes inside the ark can't be built by people. The whole idea of the Mishkan is to house God's word. That's the idea of the Mishkan. The Ramban argued the idea of the Mishkan is God continues to speak through the Mishkan. The ark is the central vessel of the Mishkan. If Moshe breaks the tablets, you can't build a Mishkan. We have to remember at all points that the story of the golden calf is a story within a story. The outer frame of the golden calf is the Mishkan. The instructions to build the Mishkan, chapter 31, chapter 25 through 31, the building of the Mishkan, the culmination of the book, chapter 35 through 40. In between is the golden calf. And the point is, when Moshe breaks the golden calf, the entire project of the Mishkan, which for the Ramban, for example, and the plain reading of the Chumash, is the goal of the book. You shall be for me a nation of priests and a holy nation. Says the Ramban, a holy nation is a holy place. God, I will dwell amongst them. But if there's no Aron, there's no Mishkan. And it's not possible to build a Mishkan, no matter how good B'tzalel is. You can't build a Mishkan. Only God can write the tablets. So therefore, Moshe's act of smashing the tablets is drastic, not just because how can you break the holy tablets, but because it makes impossible the entire project. You can't build a Mishkan. Therefore, the Torah mentions again over here, not just that the writing is the writing of God inscribed upon the tablets. So that's, I think, why the Torah repeats over here, emphasizes as he comes down the mountain, he carries with him these tablets. I have more to say about that in a couple of minutes, but let's continue over here. Okay, so now we continue in the next pasuk. Now we have the following, verse number 17. Vayishma Yoshua et kol ha'am b're'o. Yoshua hears the cry of the people crying out, b're'o, crying out, like the word trua, to cry out, to make a loud noise. Vayomer el Moshe kol milchama b'machaneh. And Yoshua says to Moshe, I hear the sound of war in the camp. Vayomer, he said, not clear who the he is in verse number 18. Vayomer, ein kol anot gvura v'ein kol anot chalusha. Kol anot anochi shomea. It's not the sound of the one who's winning. The cry is not a cry of victory. And kol anot chalusha, nor is it the cry of the one who's weaker, the one who's losing the war. Rather, kol anot anochi shomea. I would say anot over here. Here they translate the sound of song that I hear. I'm not sure I would translate anot as song. It's a cry. I'm not sure it's a cry of a song. It's a cry. It's a cry of. It's a cry of something, but not a cry of victory. In other words, it's not a war cry. So is this Yoshua correcting himself, or is it Moshe correcting Yoshua? Yes, I see in the chat, Debbie writes, is the word Bireo related to the word Ra'ah? I would say yes, for sure. For one thing, the word Re'o, that's a very good point, and for the following reason. It's good, first of all, good point in general. But the second point, what makes it particularly good is this. Bireo, in his cry, should be written in typical biblical Hebrew, Resh, Ayin, Vav. The Chumash over here has presented us what they call the archaic Hey. In other words, normally in biblical Hebrew, Re'o, his cry, you have a Vav. But sometimes you have the archaic Hey is left. Now if you have the archaic Hey, it's Resh Ayin Hey, which is the word Ra'ah. We had a similar thing with Paro, Ki Pro'o Aaron, Pei Resh Ayin Hey. Pro'o should be Pei Resh Ayin Vav. He had made them wild. Pei Resh Ayin Hey, if you keep the archaic Hey, it means he made them wild. But Pei Resh Ayin Hey spells Paro. And that's the point. Aaron acting as Paro, Aaron acting as Mitzrayim, etc. So over here, the word Bireo is an excellent point. And of course, it connects to the word Ra'ah. Now, whether Yoshua corrects himself or whether Moshe corrects him, I want to make a couple of points about this little vignette. First of all, Yoshua doesn't know what's going on in the camp. Now remember, when Moshe went up the mountain, he says, I'm going with Yoshua. He leaves behind Hur and Aaron in chapter 24. And Yoshua, his servant, his misharet, his protege, his servant, his student, whatever, he accompanies Moshe, but he waits on the bottom of the mountain. Yoshua can't go into the mountain. He waits on the bottom of the mountain. And Moshe has been away for a long time, so long that the people think maybe he's dead, right? We don't know what happened to him. He's boshesh. He's tarrying. He's delaying. He never tells them in the Chumash how long he's going away for. At least the Chumash that we have never says. But it's been away for a long time. What it means is that Yoshua is waiting for Moshe at the foot of the mountain, and he has not gone back to the camp. Had he gone back to the camp, he would know that what's going on is the screaming and maybe the dancing and all that around the golden calf. But he has no idea, because maybe any moment his Rebbe will return, and he has to wait for his Rebbe. He accompanied his Rebbe, and he's going to accompany the Rebbe on the way back. He has absolutely no idea. The example I always give when I talk about this story is a dog, actually. We had such a dog. We were in Israel. One of my kids found this dog. We sort of adopted the dog. Maybe she thought the dog maybe not be so well. Let's see, maybe we can take care of her. And she goes away to the bus stop. It was in Toccoa at the time, actually. And she's on the bus. She comes back, and the dog's standing there. She comes back 6 hours later. The dog is still there. The dog is waiting for her to come back. The connection is so deep. That's Yoshua, actually. That's the pupil. The pupil is the Rebbe, wait for the Rebbe. You have a similar situation in the book of Shmuel, with Shmuel himself. Shmuel was a youngster. He's sent by his mother Chana to serve God under the tutelage of Eli HaKohen. And Shmuel is very pious, a young person, and he hears someone calling Shmuel, Shmuel. He rushes to Eli. Yes, you called me. Yes, my Lord, you called me. I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. Goes back. Again, he is Shmuel, Shmuel. Goes to Eli. You call me, my Lord. I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. A third time. Shmuel, Shmuel. Rushes to Eli. You call me, my Lord. And Eli understands. That's God. He says, no. If you hear the voice again, then you say, God, I'm listening. Now, here's the point. It's a very powerful story. But the point is, when you read that story, you understand something. He will go back 100 times to Eli. Eli is his teacher. He's a Rebbe. So, of course, the Rebbe calls you, go. I didn't call you? Okay. I heard the voice again. It's got to be Eli. Of course, what makes it even more powerful is that for Shmuel, the voice of God and the voice of Eli are the same voice. He doesn't distinguish those voices yet. He discovers to his amazement and chagrin that not only are they not the same voice, they actually are completely opposite voices, because the message to Shmuel is, I will destroy the house of Eli. But my point is to emphasize this connection to the Rebbe. Yeshua's connection to Moshe. Well, Yamush mitocha oel. There's something so deep about this. So on one hand, Yeshua is so connected to Moshe. But on the other hand, and this is the point I want to emphasize, who is Yeshua? What do we know about Yeshua? Answer, very little. We know one thing. That when there was a war against Amalek, back in chapter 17, Moshe said to Yoshua, gather people and go to war against Amalek. Yoshua is the commander-in-chief of the Israeli army. That's who he is. He's a military man. He's going to lead the troops into the land of Canaan and engage in war with the inhabitants of the land, with the Canaanites, etc. He's a military man and a true military man. When he hears a voice, he hears a noise, he interprets it in terms of war. He hears a noise, and his response is, I don't understand. It's not the voice of the winning in battle. It's not the voice of losing in battle. It's a sound. I don't understand it. And Moshe maybe corrects him. Moshe says, no, it's Moshe says to him, perhaps, it's neither. It's a different kind of voice. Or Yeshua corrects himself, either way. The disagreement among the Ibn Ezra and the Sadia, they disagree, but it doesn't matter. My point is, and this is important for later, he's hearing, he's seeing the world differently. And that's very important for later on. Yeshua is unbelievably devoted to Moshe. Nobody's more devoted. The story later in the Chumash, Eldon Umeidon, Yoma Yoshua, Adoni Moshe Klaim. He's very zealous for his Rebbe's reputation, Rebbe's honor. But on the other hand, Moshe comes down the mountain, and this person who's been waiting patiently for so many days, he's not going to leave. Because what if he comes down? I have to be here when he comes down to walk him back to the camp. Does he need Yoshua? No, that's respect. But they don't see the world the same way. In a certain sense, he's coming down the mountain, but Moshe is very, very alone. His most beloved student, yes, beloved, but he hears things differently. That's Yoshua. But that's the point over here. Let us continue. I'll stop in a couple of minutes, take comments or questions. Yes. So now we continue. Now Moshe comes closer to the camp. And now Moshe sees the calf. He sees the dancing, the mechalot. Mechalot can be dancing, or mechalot could be musical instruments of mechalot. Maybe they're connected, the singing, the dancing, the playing music. He sees this. Moshe got angry. And Moshe gets angry. He takes the tablets in his hand and he smashes them under the mountain, Tachadahar. So here the question is, I mean, you might say it's not really a question. Moshe knew what the people had done because God told Moshe on the mountain. God said explicitly, go down, raid. Your people have corrupted themselves. They made for themselves an masecha, a molten image. And they bowed down to it, and they worshipped it, and they said, these are the gods who took you out of Egypt. So what's the surprise? He was down the mountain, He sees exactly what God told him they're doing. What are you getting angry for? You knew beforehand. Of course, one can answer simply. Knowing is one thing and seeing is something else. He knew it intellectually in his head, but now he sees it. And that would be a sufficient answer. But in this case, I think it's a better answer. I don't dispute that answer. But there actually is another answer. He knew they bowed down, and he knew they worshipped, and he knew they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, took you out of Egypt." That he knew. What he didn't know is the Mecholot. That he didn't know. He didn't know the enthusiasm. He didn't know the dancing. What he sees is, it's not that they worship, it's not an intellectual decision. He sees something that's very deep and very important point. He sees what the people really are. It's what really gets them excited. Some abstraction who talks about a fire from the top of a mountain, that's one thing. How do you connect to that? They can't. They connect to the calf. Some of you can touch, some of you can see, some of you can feel, and the dancing. And remember, when Aaron had told the people, he says later, he told the people, tomorrow, Chag Hashem Machar, there'll be a festival for God tomorrow. And the Torah says, Vayashkimu b'mocharat, they got up early in the morning. There was an enthusiasm. There's a real enthusiasm for the golden calf. And, that's probably one of the things that's driving Rashi. Not that Rashi is the plain reading of the text. The Ramban is obviously the plain reading of the text. But Rashi said that the people made, that the command to build the Mishkan is after the golden calf. For Rashi, the Mishkan is a kosher golden calf. That's how Rashi understands it. If there wouldn't be a golden calf, there'd be no Mishkan. But in point of fact, people need a Mishkan. People need something they can feel and touch and see. Almost all people need that. And the point of the golden calf, as I said, once again, you see this as a process. It's a recognition that they need something different. And Moshe sees this. He takes the tablets and he smashes them. And there's something else over here, I think, about Moshe that is, you have to keep this in mind. But God said to Moshe, the first words out of God's mouth to Moshe is, raid, go down, your people have corrupted themselves. And I think one thing to think about is, what do you mean go down, raid? In other words, this project, Moshe, that we engaged on together, we went on, it's a project to envision a different kind of people, to take the slaves out of Egypt and to live a different kind of life with a different set of values. Moshe comes down the mountain, and what he sees is the people are still in Egypt, basically. I don't mean physically there, but spiritually, emotionally, ethically, cognitively. In other words, is a failure on what Moshe could see himself as one gigantic failure, because everything he had tried to do, it's all set up. And he comes down the mountain and he recognizes, what is this? It's everything I've been talking about in preaching and all the miracles and all that. At the end of the day, what excites them is a golden calf. And Moshe takes the tablets and he breaks the tablets. Now, let me just say something about Moshe and about because from this point on, Moshe does not despair. Moshe actually makes an attempt to reconcile God with the people. And he, to some extent, largely successful, I think. Success has to be measured in terms of what is possible. But I mentioned that, first of all, Moshe goes up. Moshe has, in the Chumash, he's not a man who has too many friends. I mean, he has one friend, actually, a non-Jewish priest named Yitro, Reuel, who, as far as we see in the Chumash, has already been sent home to Midian. Outside of that, he's not a man with many friends. But he has two people that are close with him, actually very close with him. One is Yoshua, his disciple. And later on it says, Lo Yamush, he doesn't leave the tent, Lo Yamush, praying on Moshe. He's a faithful disciple. He's the one who commands the army, who fights off Amalek. That's one person. And the other one is his partner. He has a partner in all that he does, a full partner. His brother, his older brother, Aaron. Aaron is summoned from Mitzrayim. He sees Moshe. He kisses him when he meets him. There's no sense of animosity between the two. Unlike in the book of Breshit, we saw brothers, a problem with brothers. Over here, not at all. They work together. They're full partners. Now he comes down the mountain. He encounters the golden calf. And we know, and Moshe will find out very soon, and Moshe suspects already probably, it's his own brother who made the golden calf. He'll say to Aaron, what did you do? Or rather he says, right? That's a couple of psukim away, verse number 21. What did the people do to you that you did this terrible thing? The Ramban has two suggestions what that means. The first suggestion is they must have threatened you with something. Otherwise, you wouldn't make a golden calf, which does seem to be the case. They gathered around him. Is an implicit threat. I believe that's true. But the Ramban doesn't like it. The Ramban says, when avodah zara, idolatry, the halacha is you have to die rather than commit idolatry. So that can't be. What did they do? Whatever they did, you shouldn't have done it. The Ramban has a different interpretation. Said, what did they do to you that you hate them so much? That's the Ramban's interpretation. And you would enable them to do this terrible crime. You must really hate the people, says Moshe, because otherwise you would never do such a thing. That's the Ramban's preferred interpretation. Either way, it's very powerful. When you think of Aaron, you certainly don't think of somebody who hates the people, and he doesn't hate the people. But that's the Ramban. But my point is, he has two who actually are connected to Moshe, his brother and his pupil. His brother makes the golden calf. His pupil is completely committed to Moshe, but he doesn't see the world the same way. He has a different view of the world. He sees the world like a military guy sees the world. That's how Moshe sees the world. Moshe sees the world very differently, and this will have implications later on for the relationship of Moshe and Yoshua. But there actually is something else. I wanted just to conclude today's session with the following observation. I mentioned earlier that the Chumash says when Moshe came down the mountain, he carried with him the tablets of God, written by the hand of God, the tablets of God, and we spoke about that a bit before. But there's something else, and the Chumash earlier had said they were written by God, the last verse of chapter 31. But there's something else here that it doesn't say. It says over here that the writing of the tablets was written mizeh umizeh. Mishnei Evrehem Heim Ketuvim. They are written mizeh umizeh. Why did the Chumash say that the tablets are written mizeh umizeh on both sides? So I have two thoughts about that, and I'll mention what they are. By the way, when I say I have two thoughts, obviously there may be 20 other thoughts, even better than my two thoughts. But I'll tell you my two thoughts. There's all kinds of possibilities here. One possibility is that why does Moshe break the tablets? Actually, Moshe breaking the tablets taught us a very important lesson. Maybe it's one of the deepest teachings that Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us. He breaks the tablets because he understands if I give the people these tablets, these are people that want something, they want something concrete, they want something they can touch and feel. If I give them the tablets, they'll turn the tablets into idolatry. If you're dancing around a golden calf, you need something real and tangible. If I give them the Torah, they'll also turn that into an idol. Therefore, I can't give them the Torah. The idea that the Torah itself can be an idol, because the Torah is a means to an end. But if you lose sight of the end, and the means becomes an end, that's the definition of avodah zarah. And anything can become avodah zarah. The Torah, the halacha, the ark, and this appears elsewhere in the Bible. I can't get into that now. It appears in the book of Shmuel. The same Shmuel understood this. The ark can be avodah zarah. He hides the ark for 20 years. Because if you give them the ark will take on a significance it shouldn't have. It's just a means to an end. So the point is, mizeh umizeh, according to this reading, means that you can't hide it. In other words, wherever it is, it can be seen. And therefore, the only alternative is actually to break it. That's the mizeh umizeh. You can't put it in a private place. It's visible. I can't give them something that will always be visible to them, because that might turn into that would also be an idol. That's one path I think is possible. But I have another path. And this path is based on the language of Mizel Mizeh. Because the term Mizel we encountered earlier. Where did we encounter Mizel? We encountered Mizeh when Moshe's on the mountain in the story of Amalek. There he sends Yoshua to fight Amalek. He ascends the mountains himself in prayer. But the Torah says, we all remember, that when Moshe would lift up his hands, Israel would be winning. V'gavar Yisrael. And by the way, notice that expression, Gavar Yisrael and Gavar Amalek. And then the Chumash says that what happened? That Aaron and Hur supported Moshe's hands. Mizeh echad u'mizeh echad. Mizeh u'mizeh. Aaron and Hur supported Moshe's hands. Moshe's hands were firm until the evening. Vayachalosh Yoshua et Amalek v'et Amalek v'chorev. And Joshua weakened Amalek until night. Not destroyed, but weakened. There we have the Gavar Yisrael by Yachalosh, and you have right here, Ein Kol Anod Chalusha, V'Ein Kol Anod Gvura. Here you have a literary connection. But the point is, here's my point. My point is, Moshe comes down the mountain. Moshe is a loner, basically. He doesn't really have a family. He's a loner. He's all by himself. What does he have, actually? His brother sold him out. His pupil doesn't understand him. But there's something else he has. Something that's very dear to him. You know what it is? It's the tablets. It's God's tablets that we give it to Moshe. Moshe's great teacher. Moshe is the disciple. He's the pupil. That deep connection. And he carries with him the tablets, Mizeh u'Mizeh, that are Moshe's support. And Moshe comes down the mountain and he sees the people and he realizes that in order to lead the people, he has to destroy the tablets. The one thing that he actually has, the one thing that's the closest to him, but he has no choice. He can't give them these tablets. It would be counterproductive. And therefore, he breaks the tablets. And it underscores the absolute aloneness of this man. His brother, his pupil, and now the tablets themselves are broken. And now the question is, he broke them under the mountain, right? Tachtit Tahar is where they stood to receive the Torah at Sinai. And now the question that the Chumash raises before we get to verse number 20 is, what is next? Because yes, Moshe had argued with God, but where do you go from here? People dancing around a golden calf. And Moshe's resolved to actually try to make things work. And that's our next session. Yes.
Just want to give you a reminder about the time since you had asked. It is 11:30.
11. I have 11:13. Okay, we'll stop at this point. If anybody has a comment or question, we got 2 minutes.
All right. I see a lot of questions in chat, and if I don't get to yours, I'm very sorry. But let's start with.
Well, let me say I can start next week with questions as well, but I'll take 1 or 2 questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Just start with one from chat. Franz Schifrin, quote, "If the tablets are representative of the covenant and our relationship with God, why are they placed in the Aron, always hidden from the people?"
Well, that's a good question. I think that they are representative of the relationship with God, but God is also a hidden God, right? The relationship with God is not right. It's not one who's manifest in all points. They're placed in a hidden place, or I would say it's not so much to hide them. It's a place that is sort of inaccessible, because even though it's a covenant between two parties, the two parties are quite unequal. That's part of the challenge of the covenant with God. God is not equal to us. We are not equal to God, which is why when I talk about the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, I made the point that Avram is only able to enter into the covenant when he's willing to give up the future, when he accepts his mortality completely. If Yitzchak is God, there's no future. That is ultimately what defines the human being. Human being is mortal. God is not. God is infinite. And in order to enter into a covenant with God, you have to accept that reality. That is the reality. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. And only by accepting that reality that I am not God, can you enter into a full relationship with God. So part of it is not so much to hide it, I think, but to separate it. And it's always there. We know it's there. But that the Holy of Holies is a place that is inaccessible. Because God is not always accessible, and God is maybe immanent, but certainly transcendent. There's more to be said about that, but I think that's the point. I'll take one more comment. I have to get off.
Rabbi Silber,
Yeah.
the theme of aloneness, which the golden calf already introduced, that the absence of Moses, and then this you introduced the theme of aloneness in the breaking of the tablets, and it continues that ultimately God will speak to Moses alone in the rock cleft of the rock.
That is true. Right. We'll talk more about that. I'll just end with the following observation about aloneness. The Day of Atonement, the day of Yom Kippur, the great day of Yom Kippur, there are two main characters that are around which the service of Yom Kippur is built. One is Moshe. Of course, the Slichot are a reenactment of the Yud Gimel Midot after the golden calf. So Yom Kippur largely recalls the story of the golden calf, and that's Moshe, as you say, who alone receives the instruction about God's qualities, God's attributes. But the other hero of Yom Kippur is the high priest, Aaron. He enters the Holy of Holies. What does the Chumash say when Aaron enters the Holy of Holies? Nobody may stand in the inner precincts when Aaron enters the Holy of Holies. He enters alone. And the idea of Yom Kippur that, yes, we believe in a covenantal community, but at the end of the day, we walk alone in the world. And the two great heroes of Yom Kippur, the two great events of Yom Kippur that the service recalls, the golden calf and Moshe alone standing in the cleft of the rock and getting instructions about God's attributes of mercy, and the high priest who enters the Holy of Holies, they both act very much alone. I have to stop at this point. I'll take more comments and questions next week. And next week we will continue with the golden calf. If we don't finish it, then in the next set of sessions, I'll continue with the golden calf, and then we'll jump to a big topic, which is some of the laws that we skipped in Pashat Mishpatim, and maybe in the future also have a bunch of sessions about the Mishkan.
So there's class next week?
Yes, there is a class next week. The last one of the session, there is a class, yes. I have to stop at this point. I have another engagement now. But okay, this is one of the great stories of the Bible, obviously, and one of the most significant stories as well. I find it an incredibly powerful story. Okay, looking forward to continuing to learn with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Silber.
I hope to see as many of you as possible next week for our final session for now. But this class will resume on a following Pesach, along with the rest of our Sfirazman classes, which you can check out and register for at drisha.com/classes. And with that,
Thank you.
Chodesh Tov, and have a good day.